Welcome to another episode of Metabolic Radio with your hosts, Taylor Empey and Shane Pace.
And me. And here's my face.
Shane's
Shane's face.
So today is a Q&A episode, I think, Shane, because we have not, we haven't done some Q&As for a little bit.
Ooh, we have a follow-up to a question.
Oh, one of the ones we're going to talk about?
Well, maybe not. I don't know if we're going to talk about this or not. You asked a question about tracking macros.
Yeah.
If they want to determine macros.
Ariana responded?
She responded.
Oh,
yes.
Cool. Yeah, I do want to cover that one today. So first one, let's get into it, comes from Ben in the forum.
I shall be looking to my side because I will be looking at my phone.
To see
this
if
is the back of my phone.
She's responding semi-live.
Well, that way, if we need to look at anything, we can.
Cool.
And when I say we, I'm talking about this one.
Okay.
On that note, I would like to show something I'm going to share with the general populace of the world.
What's that? A sleeping puppy.
That is my big one. And my small one.
For those of you listening on the
one.
audio podcast and not watching the video, he just showed a picture of his sleeping puppy.
My sleeping boxer puppy. She's a good girl. Yes, you are. All right, anyway. Sorry.
Right. So first question comes from Ben in the forum, and if you're not a member of our forum yet, go to Facebook and type in Metabolic Radio Private Forum, where we will add you to the group and add you to the conversation and answer your questions on the show. Ben says, in your opinion, what would build leg muscle and definition faster? Heavy sled pushes for a few hundred yards or sprints for the same distance? And this is a question we talked about. We did answer him back briefly in the forum, but I think this was a really cool one. I like questions like these, like versus questions, like, just comparing. Do you want to start with your answer, or do you want me to go with mine?
It doesn't matter. We can go either way.
All right.
I'll go either way with that one. I will say this. We'll start with mine because it'll make it easier.
You hear that, people? Shane goes either way.
That is so not true.
I know.
Oh.
Anyway.
And he digresses.
I digress.
Okay, so
sled pushes versus sprints for a few hundred yards, which is going to be better at building leg muscle and definition faster.
And my answer was, that is a very good question.
That's true.
I'm not quoting it, but I did say that. And then I said my guess would be sleds. But I will say this before you answer your response, because I'm going to go beyond cardio on this. Sprints are amazing for developing muscle.
Yeah, I agree.
Amazing for them, as long as they're full-out sprints.
Yeah.
If they're any long-distance stuff, they're not.
Well, because it recruits a fast-twitch muscle fiber, those fast, explosive strength muscle fibers that we've talked about in our muscle fiber type episode a while back. If you're, like you said, you're doing a true all-out sprint, then yes, there's definitely. I mean, just look at sprinters in track and field. Anything from 400 meter down. And they're built like that. They've got very powerful, strong-looking, defined quads. Well, legs in general. My answer, I think we're both on the same page based off of what we answered in the forum, but my answer is that, I concluded that they both have benefits, but ultimately I think if you had to pick one or the other, for continual development, I would pick the sled because your overall volume is more. I mean, the amount of weight that you can push on a sled versus the amount of body weight you're pushing on your own body when sprinting is substantially more with the sled and can be added to. I mean, I guess we could do sprints with weighted vests, and that would be cool too.
Still wouldn't be the same level.
No, not at all. It still would progress you, but not like you said. They're very different ratios. But I think what would be really cool is if you did both, because when you're working with the sled, if you're going for, all out strength and large leg muscle development, or even tone. And a lot of this can be controlled through diet. So if you're not looking for big quads, it still is a great way to train legs and develop nice lean legs if you're controlling through diet, but get the performance aspect too. So when you're sled pushing, that can help with the muscle development and the strength component. But when you're doing the sprints, now we're talking about things like speed and power and force, which are more performance oriented as well. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, without question. If you do them in conjunction, I wouldn't do them in the same session.
No, not necessarily. I mean, you could combine them as a superset back-to-back, which would be pretty brutal. I wouldn't do it to excess or necessarily a ton of frequency because, I mean, that's going to be a really high-intensity combination to put together depending on the person's fitness level.
Right. You're right on that.
Yeah. So I don't know. Is there anything else you wanted to add to that? I feel like there's muscle development that you could see from both. I'd probably say because you have higher amounts of resistance that you can incorporate on the sled, that's probably the better way to go for overall muscle.
Yeah, but let's talk on the sled really quick. So here's some of the things about the sled that's going to be a lot different than sprints anyway. You have added resistance because of its sliding on the ground. And so, unless you're even with wheels, you'd have more resistance because of how it's built than doing a sprint full out. So the friction itself would give an added resistance that would cause more stress in your muscles. Mm-hmm. So no matter how you look at it, technically speaking, for muscle growth, because of the restrictions that you'd have fighting against you, it would have to go to the sled. Mm-hmm. Now, also, that's not based on studies, but that is based on logic. So.
Well, and if you look at it from biomechanics too, depending on how a person pushes a sled, whether we're talking about them sprinting with the sled or whether we're talking about slow, controlled driving steps, you can flat foot press a sled very effectively depending on how you position your body and get more recruitment from your glutes because you can drive through your heel for part of the movement until your foot comes up off the ground. And in a sprint, I mean, you can't sprint flat-footed, right? So you're not going to get as much glute activation firing. So, I mean, I would say if you're looking at building better glutes, then sleds would they're both great exercises, don't get me wrong. But if we're comparing the two, then I would go with weighted sled pushes, going slow and controlled, and driving through the heel through part of the movement until you're taking your step and your foot comes off the ground, off the ball of your foot.
No, I'd agree with that.
So yeah, I don't know. I feel like that one's pretty explanatory. I don't have anything else really to add.
No, and like I said, the biggest thing about it is, if you take it, like I said, I can't do it based off of studies or anything like that because I haven't read any on dealing with sleds, to be honest. But by sheer logic base, it would have to have more because it has more resistance in every aspect.
Yeah.
There's no way around the resistance factors. Mm-hmm. And if it's especially when you start talking the same distance, you would have more resistance to it for sure.
Actually, one thing you could do. So when we talk about adding resistance, it seems a little bit easier to throw just more weight plates on a sled, but there's a lot of different variable resistance exercises you could do with increasing progressive overload with sprints, which is like we talked about, a weighted vest. You could also do those large rubber bands where if you have a training partner, they can hold you take a large rubber band and put it around your waist, and then you sprint while a person is behind you holding it with their hands, so that it has this kind of variable resistance effect. There's a lot of other
that's more
resistance exercises you could, or
there is
forms
I
of
mean
resistance you could add to it.
You can do similar concept with resistance bands, a bungee type scenario. Mm-hmm. I've seen that done where you're doing it by yourself because that does give resistance, but it's different. Like I said, there is no ground friction. Mm-hmm. And so because you're not having resistance of the actual device itself, it would lessen it no matter how you look at it. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no,
I'm not ditzing on it, but the more I'm thinking on this on a logical sense, using physics basis, it would 100% go to sledding. Well, sledding is different. Now, if you're sledding, that's going downhill. Bob. Or what is that one called?
Wes also in the forum mentioned uphill sprints, which would add substantial resistance and More
does.
friction, but not as much as a sled would still
Exactly.
experience.
Right, and when I said back to him is he's right that it would be more related to a sprint. It would also change the dynamics depending on the incline, and as well as the distance.
Mm-hmm.
So if you because you're going on a hill, most hills are either going to be short or way long. It's one or the other, and so because you can't really choose that. So if you're going to run the entire length of a hill, that would change the dynamics of it too. On top of the fact that you would sprint up and then you'd have to come back down and sprint back up.
Yeah.
So,
but
it is a different dynamic. But anyway.
Yeah, I think that distance and grade would definitely have a huge impact, depending the variability there. But I've used there's a hill at a park that I go to that if you think about like kind of like a freeway on ramp, how they have like sometimes a grassy hill next to a park or something, like about that distance, 40, 50 yards incline sprints, that would be brutal. That would be a great workout. And you would see great leg development, whether you want, lean legs and you're dieting for cutting and you want a good interval training cutting technique, or if you're trying to build muscle and you want to build quads, both, I think, sleds and sprints.
Quads, yes. On the sprints up the hills.
Mm-hmm.
It depends on the depth of your steps, on if you're going to get more of the quads on incline. But yeah, you're right.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Next is Ariana's question. So she said, she just said best way to count macros, ? So I asked, are you looking for best ways to track macros, or are you like a tool or something like that, or are you looking for how to calculate macronutrients for different individual needs? Did she happen to respond to that? Because I only responded today.
Yeah, that was the one that she said she wants to determine the macros.
Oh, okay, so she wants a way to determine macronutrients.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I think we both agree that, well, let's just cover both of them, but one of the best ways to track macronutrients is really, in my opinion, MyFitnessPal. There's other calorie tracking apps, macronutrient tracking apps out there. I just have yet to see one that's superior to MyFitnessPal, and even the free version gives you pretty much everything you need to really track not just macronutrients, but some micronutrients, fiber, sugar, vitamins and minerals, and I don't necessarily like how it sets up its recommended calories. I definitely tweak that because you and I use a lot more detailed calculations than what MyFitnessPal does, but it's a great start. And if you know how to manipulate it in your favor, I think it's a great tool that one can use to actually track their macronutrients and calorie intake. Probably the best one out there.
Well, there's other ones that have different benefits. But overall, without question, it's probably the most used, and it has the most food choices I've seen on any of them. So you don't have to figure it out if it's already got a label, because it's likely already in it.
Oh yeah, I've never not found a food in that database.
I have, but it's very rare, and the other ones are nowhere near as in depth. So that's one of the biggest pluses for MyFitnessPal for tracking.
I agree. So that's probably the best tool I would recommend people use to track their nutritional intake, and I do recommend clients do that. And another reason is because that can sync with most, if not all, I think, fitness tracker bands. So I recommend people get a fitness tracker band.
It doesn't connect. It doesn't connect to Samsung's. Samsung, for whatever reason, has decided to do their own health and tracking for food even
application.
Yeah, and because of it, I think they have never connected to MyFitnessPal for the simple fact they would be going against their own product. But it is the only one that I know of off the top of my head easily that doesn't connect to it pretty readily. So I know I've got a Garmin. I know you use yours.
My
Um,
Fitbit.
your Fitbit, both of those connect to MyFitnessPal
Yeah,
easily.
it makes it a
Microsoft,
lot more accurate for estimating caloric needs because it actually has your total daily energy expenditure that you've more
at least a good
accurately
guess,
burned. Yeah, from
right?
your tracker
Yep,
versus just a calculatory estimate in the app of MyFitnessPal.
right, right. But yeah, it does connect to most of them. I know that for a fact. So
So what people will notice with MyFitnessPal is that it recommends specific macronutrients, but the ratios are almost always the same. Um, and that's based off of, I'm not sure exactly what it's based off of, but when I look at it, it looks like it's based off of US dietary guidelines, which is super high carb, low protein, kind of medium to low fat.
you can change that,
Yeah, and you can definitely customize it if you go into the menu and then you hit goals and then you hit calorie and macronutrient goals. You can custom change it to whatever you want, which I
even if you're
recommend
not
you
doing
do.
right. Even if you're not using the paid version, it still
Yeah,
does
I've
macros.
I've only ever used the free version for me and my clients. But macronutrient ratios, I mean, we have basic. There's you can base it off of. There's some people that'll base it off of what competitors do, and I'm not really sure what their breakdowns are. Then there's
Neither,
body
I
typing, which we
was going to say
we
neither one of us have competed, so you're right.
yeah. But then there's basing it off of body types like ectomorph, mesomorph, endomorph, and kind of subcategories of that. There's also basing macronutrients off of certain diets. Like a ketogenic diet calls for its own type of macronutrient breakdown. Um, Paleo, I believe, I mean, not necessarily strictly, but it kind of calls for its own. Atkins kind of calls for its own. So really, your macronutrients, determining macronutrients for yourself or other individuals comes down to, I really like the factors that you want to base that off of. When I calculate nutrition for my clients, I take into consideration their body type, their activity level, their age, their gender, um, like a lot of factors. And so those are kind of the main primary ones that I think influence metabolic rate, that influence I don't know if I said, but body fat percentage. I mean, if someone is
Hmm.
20% body fat or 40% body fat but at the same weight, their macronutrients should be different.
Dramatically different,
And
actually.
yeah, what do you think?
Well, no, I would never argue on that anyway. You're more that style than I am as it is. I will track it, which I have. I've got a long history on MyFitnessPal, but I admittedly, over the last probably 6 months, haven't used it as much. All I can do is go on there to keep my life alive on there. And I haven't been, I only track on occasion, but I haven't been really consistent about it because, like I said, ever since my shoulder injury,
Mm-hmm.
which would be years back, so that's not true, ever since it started to really bother me, um, I have really backed off and not done anything in the gym really, and because of that, tracking for me is irrelevant right now because I'm not worried about anything. I'm not worried about the idea of trying to push through anything. So my tracking is been non-existent for that reason. One thing I do want to bring up on the idea of tracking it, however, that I mentioned in my statements to her on Facebook, which wasn't part of determining, it was more force tracking, is the idea that the best way to truly deal with your food, and you would agree with this, I'm sure, even based on when you're after you've determined it on performing through it, is you want to take care of your own stuff. If you're buying stuff prepackaged from a store,
Oh yeah.
your numbers are going to be extremely off.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to be exacting and you're going to be trying to determine and fall through on it, you pretty much want to become your own cook
Yeah. Well, and I mean,
with the scale.
you can track calories and macros and things like that still fairly easily with labeled foods, but the problem is you're getting the poor quality, and we've talked about that in
That's
our
true too.
IIFYM, or if it fits your macros based dieting episodes. And so we just would recommend for sure going as whole food as possible. I actually just redid my meal plan last night, so I have a photo shoot scheduled in August. It's about 6 weeks out, almost 6.5, and so I did a programming and new meal plan, and
You're bulking.
I'm doing a 3 week build focus with a 3 week cut because I can cut fast. And so I'm anyway. What I did with that is I set my macronutrients based off body type and what I know about
Mm-hmm.
myself and my higher muscle ratio and the fact that I can burn through glucose pretty easily. So I did high carb. I added a little bit more protein. Excuse me. With a slight caloric surplus, and then the last 3 weeks are going to be a deficit. So I'm doing a 50% carb, 30% protein, 20% fat split because I'm just familiar with my body, and that's close to a traditional ectomorph recommendation based off John Berardi
Little high.
research. For him, no.
So
He recommends up to
really
50,
50?
55% sometimes on
That shocks me.
on ectomorphs.
Well, I can see that though because they're not really carb sensitive.
No, they have that high sympathetic nervous system, and they burn through glucose really easily. Um, but what was I gonna say? Oh, so I'm actually eating all whole foods. I'm eating nothing out of a package, except for I'm actually gonna do plant-based protein. I'm gonna do probably Vega, or Orgain, um, because I'm not doing dairy either.
You're
During
talking
my
supplementation.
talk just in my supplementation. So the only processed food I'm having is a serving of plant-based protein that's non-dairy based and non-soy as well. So I
Right.
cut out gluten, soy, dairy, processed foods, artificials. So it'll be interesting. I'll be curious to see how it goes. But the first 3 weeks is building and slight surplus, and then the last 3 weeks is cutting with slight deficit. So I'm thinking about documenting that.
No, that'd be cool.
But the way that I determined my macros was based off of body typing and what I know about myself. So that's if you want to start with body types, that's a great place to start. Ectomorphs typically can handle a lot higher carbs, and then their fats. And when I'm saying this, I'm basing this off of one scientist's research. And then lower fats. So, like I said, about a 50% carbohydrate, 30% protein, 20% fat. Mesomorphs are kind of right in the middle with everything, like a 40 carb, 30 protein, 30 fat. And then endomorph would be a high fat because they'll respond really well to that. About a 40% or more fat.
Usually.
Yeah.
Right.
40% fat. I think, 35% protein, 25% carb?
I would go even higher than that on fats personally, but
Yeah, you could, and then you'd be upwards nearing potential ketogenic type diets or just high fat. And the
yep.
reason for that, we can talk about it in depth. I think did we do an episode on this? Oh, hello. But
that's because she is running for my daughter who is causing a problem. That's her hand.
So, but endomorphs will respond really well to high fat because they do have a lower sensitivity to carbohydrates, and so they can utilize dietary fats for fuel better. And
Yep.
so yeah, that'd be that's where I always start. But then I almost always tweak macronutrients based off individual needs. Like I said, take into consideration how physically active they are. They may not need as much fuel source of carbohydrate or fat if they're not very physically active. If they're highly physically active or extremely athletic, their carbohydrates and fats can be a lot higher. Depending on how much they're breaking their body down, their protein may need to be higher. But if they're only doing a couple weight training sessions a week and some cardio, their protein needs, they're not necessarily breaking down a lot of muscle mass. So it really depends on those kinds of factors. Just know that carbs and fats are primarily used for fuel, and proteins are primarily used for repair, but can be used for fuel in the absence of carbs and protein. So just depending on what your individual needs are or your client's individual needs are, if you're a trainer listening, because I know Ariana is a trainer that I actually work with. And so if you're programming for other people, then take into consideration physical activity factor and how intense are their workouts and what's the frequency.
Right. No, and on top of that, you have to track it and monitor the effect, because if you don't do that, you're actually not going to have a true determination.
Oh, yeah.
Because you modifying on the fly is how you're actually going to find out what works best as it is.
Mm-hmm. And that's just
let's be real.
Yeah, that's just a starting position. Once you and track measurements, track not just that, but track how you feel, track how your body looks, how it's responding, track things like inflammation and bloat, energy levels, brain function, cognition. All of these things can give you clues to how to adjust your macronutrients once you pick a starting position, and then you can tweak them up or down based off of those factors.
Mm-hmm. Yep. No, exactly.
Cool. Anything else you want to add to that?
No, actually, I think you covered it pretty well. And like I said, well, I'll add again. I'm going to restate. I'm not really going to add because I've already said it. But understand when you're trying to determine a setup for anybody, realize no matter what their base body type is, because of hormone profiles, because of
that's a big
true
one, too.
muscle mass, because of all these other factors, it's going to be very individualized, and so that's why you have to kind of play with it and kind of feel for it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna break this into conversation. This is gonna be a mixed question because it does match something else that's going on in Australia that you know about, and I have become more aware of. She actually went to you first,
Lorena.
Yeah. So she was going to compete, and she, bluntly, she got a really, really, really crappy trainer.
Mm-hmm. You talking about originally, a long time ago? Because we've
been
talked
a while
about this
ago.
before.
Yes, we talked about it a little bit. Yeah, yes, this isn't a new one. She's not going to compete. She's already told me she doesn't plan on competing ever again because it's not worth doing destruction to her body.
Mm-hmm.
But this trainer absolutely destroyed her. And in my personal opinion, I think it's really, really messed her entire hormonal base up. Because she's going through some pretty heavy stuff right now dealing with it. And modifying and playing with her diet is going to be a really intricate thing because it's changed dramatically for her.
Mm-hmm.
She was definitely someone who could deal with high carbs in a lot of ways without
She's
even
an
a problem
ectomorph,
before.
you can tell.
In some ways, yes.
Yeah,
in other
I
ways,
mean,
she
skeletally.
has right. She has different more normal for female, like around the hips and stuff like that. That's
Mm-hmm.
different. But the reality of it is, in my belief, I think that the way that she had her eating and all these other things was to make her lose the competition because she was competing against her, which is the most incredible thing.
I do remember you saying this.
Yeah, which is the most incredible thing on not Lorena's side, but on her side, because that is so unethical, unbelievably unethical
on every level.
On every level,
One,
absolutely.
You're accepting the payment as
Right.
a coach.
Yes.
And two, it's a human's body. You're purposefully malnourishing them. I mean, if that was actually taking place,
which is all assumptive on our parts, but
and on a professional level,
yeah.
as well.
If she was good, this is the only things I'll say. If she was as good as she should have been, considering the high level of performance that she had done herself, in competition, and I think she trained herself, she would not have done what she did. So do I believe it was personal?
She already had an edge over her competition. She knew what her client's diet was. She could have still fed her client, Lorena, as well as possible, but now she knows what her training is, what her diet is, and I mean, honestly, if she's more experienced, she could write something better for herself, unless truly Lorena was just genetically more gifted than her.
Which I believe she was, and I think that's the reason why she's sabotaged. Because like I said, I'm not saying in fairness that I know that for a fact, but my assumptives are
all,
that she did.
Hypothetical
or
right.
And I'm not going to put a name out there because even if I remembered it, which I do not, I wouldn't put her name out there because I'm not trying to attack her because I don't know for a fact anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't do that. But the problem is now because of it, it's been it's got to be a year ago almost that this all went down, maybe even more. And she's fighting even more. I mean, she's dealing with things like depression and things like that. And I mean, everything's pushing towards the idea that it's related to a dietary more than even a training scenario, because I think training goes into this as well. But when you start really looking at it and analyzing it, especially here is the doctors that she talked to, they pushed her away from diet. They pushed her towards medication.
Well, that's
And
what they're trained to do.
agreed. And but see, like I said before, the problem I've got with that and we've discussed this. I mean, don't get me wrong. We've talked about this in a lot of shows, as a matter of fact. But we touched on it in depth when we talked about the training of doctors nutritionally, at least in the United States. But my point is, she's having an effect. She went to a dietitian as well. She's having an effect, even though I don't necessarily agree with where the dietitian went. She's having a positive effect in some ways on a level dealing with chemistry of her body, which proves that it has to be related to diet, because she wouldn't have any effect if it didn't have anything to do with diet. Which,
Yeah.
I mean, on a holistic perspective, you're looking at something that is always going to correspond with everything you're doing. So if you're working out, if you're doing this, that, and the other, all of it's going to affect it in one way or another. Big effect that the diet is in this circumstance. So, like I said, going back and corresponding these, why I kind of changed topics in mid-stride here. Determining what's going to be right, especially in a case where you're fighting against metabolic damage, which is, I guarantee, is what she's going through, is so hard to throw a thing on it right away, instead of being able to play with it. You have to play with it.
I think you brought up a good point, which earlier you said, hormone profiles, which have an impact on what determine body type, but hormone profiles specifically can be manipulated by circumstantial and environmental factors, and you can need to change macronutrients based off just hormonal profiles alone. And especially in a metabolically damaged state like that, for male or female, and depending on what kind of damage we're actually talking about, or hormone imbalance we're talking about, you absolutely would need to experiment with food and try different things and see really, and with metabolic damage, it could take a long time before you get back to normal.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest problem is people want to keep seeing results, but repair the metabolic damage in the process. And sometimes, guess what? You can't keep cutting, or you can't keep, chasing after what you're chasing after, or trying to create for yourself, until you get back to normal. And sometimes that means taking, a step or two back before you take two or three steps forward.
Right.
And it's especially with metabolic damage. And so you have to play with food. You have to be okay putting on some body fat. You have to be okay getting back and resetting to a safe level. And that could take months.
Oh, without question. That's kind of what she and I have talked about. I says, here's the thing you got to worry about, because she was talking about performance stuff, and hopefully the stuff in the background is not too loud, but the things that you got to really look for, especially when you're in a state like that. Okay, and this does differ between the two scenarios that we're talking about in this situation. But when you start talking about this stuff, you've got to look at health. Who cares about a weight control issue at this point? Get your body back to a point where you're not going through weird obviously hormonally based stuff. Mm-hmm. Try and get that in check first. Get it so that you are in line to go back in and start to hit it in the gym. I'm not saying that I would back away from the gym, because I think that's part of the hormone profile, is if you go into the gym, as we both talked about before as well. Kind of wish your dad was on this, actually, Tay. But the reason why is because, psychologically speaking, the effect of exercise is so immense that taking it out of the mix, I think, would actually damage this more. But you've got to be very controlled even in what you do in exercise. Because when you're, as you know, and we've talked about many times in this show as well, when you start to work out too hard and you're in a metabolic damage state in the first place, all you're doing is exacerbating it. You're making it substantially worse.
Yeah.
And so backing off training to a point where you're getting some effect, but you're not trashing your body, is going to make you come back to a healthier state in a much faster way.
Yeah.
So, but I thought we should probably
and more
touch on that, because
sustainable
it does
too.
Correspond. Right. It does. All this does kind of correspond with the idea of determining, because especially when you're working with a metabolism that's jacked up, you've got different hurdles, and trying to determine that is always going to be a fishing match. You know, you're putting out one line to see if anything catches. It does, great. Sweet doesn't, you totally change your line, throw out something else completely new, try doing bait. You know, it's just you go down the lines of trying to figure out what it is.
One factor at a time.
One factor. That's why I say use the term fingering it, because you're going to pull it out one piece, and then you don't pull it out two. You don't pull it out in fours, because if you do that, then
you don't know
then
what
the next
was the cause.
Exactly right. You can't isolate, and so you know she's already kind of backed off and cleaned up her diet. No, I don't want to use the word clean. That's not appropriate. She's
reevaluated.
She's not even reevaluated. She's made it to the point where she's eating stuff that shouldn't have as much of a nutritional effect one way or the other, so that she can get it to a 0 point, so she can start to build back up to a point where she's right.
Yeah.
And that's the best way to do it, actually, because you clear the table off, you put one thing on it, you figure out what that is. The only problem with doing that, and she and I have talked about this, and you and I have talked about it again a little bit on the show, but more outside of the show, but is when you start eating really specific foods, you really screw up your gut biome, and that messes with this too.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So,
do you want me to read through some of the details she sent me? Because I've got them right here, actually.
No, I think we've cut it pretty well. She and I have been in discussion about this now for almost 3 weeks, and two weeks really pretty heavily. And like I said, it's been in the back of my head constantly because I really want to fix this. I consider her a pretty good friend. I like her a lot. She's somebody I've known now for quite a while. Anyway.
All right, cool.
So, like I said, I thought I'd bring it up. If you want to bring up factors, we'll do it in a different episode. I don't want to do it in this one.
Okay. I'll read through that and do that next Q&A.
As it works.
So, I think that's all we got for today. Anything else you wanted to
add? No, man.
Cool.
Time-wise, I know that you're under a pressing schedule.
Yeah, I would love to talk more, but alas, there is another commitment ahead of me today. So
and I myself I shouldn't say without commitment, I am on vacation. So.
Cool. Oh, so everybody bombard Shane with Facebook messages, and he will answer your questions.
I likely will.
On Facebook.
And you may not want to start an argument with me today or this week, because as Taylor already knows, we won't discuss where.
Shane's a bit moody.
I don't know if moody's correct. I know I use that term myself, but I'm in a mood is the term I used. But I admittedly am prepared to battle.
Prepared to battle.
So, yeah.
Cool. Well, there you have it, people. Cool. There's some information about metabolic damage, how to calculate your own macronutrients, and what did we? Also, how to tone up or build legs and sleds versus sprints, essentially.
Amazing question, though, Ben. I thought that was a cool question.
It's funny because the second I saw it, I was like, that's a cool question. And I want to see more questions like that. So keep them coming, people.
Yeah.
Yeah, join our forum on Facebook, Metabolic Radio Private Forum, and leave us a 5-star rating and review on iTunes if you like the show.
Show for show.
All right, people. Have a good day.
Peace.
Peace.